Today on English Bites we visit Ballarat in Victoria, which used to be a gold mining town. 150 years ago, a group of miners refused to pay mining fees. They built a wooden fort and refused to leave. When authorities attacked the fort, about 30 men were killed. This famous event is known as the Eureka Stockade. Let's find out more.
We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other.
I think Eureka was important in Australian history in the first place because in the 19th century people argued that a nation couldn't have a history unless there was a battle in it.
And fight to defend our rights and liberty!
And since Australia had no real military history, Eureka Stockade was a godsend to the nationalism of the time.
I believe Eureka was the birthplace of the Australian spirit, and in saying that, I'm saying that spirit of the want for fairness and a fair go.
We hear all our major politicians saying, I want a fair go for X or Y. And I think that's what the miners were really on about. They felt unfairly dealt with by the colonial administration and were really protesting against that.
The federal government has now declared it will place Eureka on its National Heritage List, forever preserving the site where more than 30 diggers lost their lives at the hands of the Queen's men and 6 troopers died in the name of duty.
It's a dramatic flashpoint. It was from Eureka that you can trace many of the experiments that were introduced by the colonial parliaments. Universal manhood suffrage, that's one man, one vote, not having to own property to be able to vote, and eventually granting women the vote. Australia did this before most other countries in the world.
The Heritage Council argues it's the legacy of Eureka that matters, just as much as the rebellion itself. But that legacy means different things to different people, and always has.
It's one of the most argued about events in Australian history, and to some people it symbolises a demand for a fair go. For others it highlights the importance of revolution. For others it highlights the danger of an interfering, regulating government. I mean, this is one of the reasons why it lives, because it's got so many messages.
The tattered flag was restored in the 1970s by a woman whose great-great-grandmother helped make the original. She also created a replica for the gallery. And that's the other thing you learn about Eureka devotees. Many have some historic connection to the event.
Was it a well-made flag in the first place?
Oh, beautifully made. The seams are only 5 millimetres in thickness and the stitching is perfect. I really feel we must salute those ladies for what they did on the goldfields while still bringing up children and feeding their miner husbands.
The Eureka Centre offers education to students nationwide on the build-up to Eureka and the battle, and has helped organise part of this week's celebrations. But perhaps it still has some way to go.
The blue's what they wear, the stars are the Southern Cross, and the white's the unity.
So there, the symbolism of Eureka really can be however you choose to see it.
So the events of the Eureka Stockade are still discussed and argued about. The word stockade means a strong wooden fence built around an area to defend it. The flag in the story was used by the miners to represent their cause. It shows the Southern Cross. The Southern Cross is a constellation or cluster of stars which can be seen in the Southern Hemisphere. The miners used it on their flag. The Southern Cross is still used in Australia today. Now let's get back to the story. Ron is an expert on the events of the Eureka Stockade. Why does he think it's so important?
I believe Eureka was the birthplace of the Australian spirit, and in saying that, I'm saying that spirit of the want for fairness and a fair go.
He believes that Eureka was the birthplace of the Australian spirit. Here, spirit refers to the general character or mood of something. He describes the Australian spirit as the want for fairness and a fair go. A fair go is a slang way of saying reasonable opportunity. He thinks that Eureka was the birthplace of the Australian belief that everyone deserves a fair opportunity to succeed. What else came from the experience of the Eureka Stockade? Let's listen to Tom from the Australian Heritage Council.
It was from Eureka that you can trace many of the experiments that were introduced by the colonial parliaments.
To trace means to follow the development of something. From the Eureka Stockade, you can follow the development of many of the experiments introduced by colonial parliaments. Here, an experiment is a test of a new idea. And colonial is an adjective. It means of or relating to a colony. A colony is a country that's controlled by another country. Australia was once controlled by Britain, so it had colonial parliaments or governments. So Tom is saying that from the time of the Eureka Stockade, you can see the development of some important new ideas that were brought in by the government. Let's hear about some of these ideas.
Universal manhood suffrage, that's one man, one vote, not having to own property to be able to vote, and eventually granting women the vote. Australia did this before most other countries in the world.
The experiments tried by the colonial parliaments included universal manhood suffrage. Tom explains that means one man, one vote. Universal means involving everyone. Manhood just means male. And suffrage means the right to vote in an election. When the parliament was first set up, not everyone was allowed to vote. But after the Eureka Stockade, the Parliament passed universal male suffrage, the right of every man to vote. So Parliament passed that law, eventually granting women the vote as well. Eventually means after a long time, and granting means giving. So after a long time, the Parliament decided to allow women to vote too. Tom says that Australia did this before most countries in the world. So for Tom, the Eureka Stockade was important because it was the start of new ways of thinking about government and citizens. But everyone has their own ideas. Here's Jeffrey, an expert on Australian history.
It's one of the most argued about events in Australian history, and to some people it symbolises a demand for a fair go.
To some people it symbolises a fair go. Symbolise means to represent or to stand for. The Eureka Stockade represents or stands for the idea of a fair go for everyone.
For others it highlights the importance of revolution, for others it highlights the danger of an interfering, regulating government. I mean, this is one of the reasons why it lives, because it's got so many messages.
For others, it highlights the importance of revolution. To highlight means to show or to emphasise, and a revolution is the overthrow of a government. The men at Eureka Stockade were trying to start a revolution to change the way Australia was governed. Let's listen to that clip again.
For others, it highlights the importance of revolution. For others, it highlights the danger of an interfering, regulating government. I mean, this is one of the reasons why it lives, because it's got so many messages.
For some people, the Eureka Stockade highlights the danger of an interfering, regulating government. Someone who's interfering is meddling. They get involved in people's lives in an annoying and unwelcome way. And regulating means controlling or making something work in a certain way. So an interfering, regulating government involves itself in people's lives and tries to control them. Eureka Stockade has many meanings. That's why it lives on in people's minds and is so important in Australian history. Luckily, most of today's words have only one meaning. And if you missed any of them, you can visit the English Bites website and watch today's story again.